In this video, I will be explaining how to complete FSA crop data report spreadsheets for different counties. Instructions are at the top of the spreadsheet. When you open up the crop spreadsheet, you will see a filtered table that looks like this. So these are the filters at the top. You'll see the little filter symbol, and this is the table that kind of goes through for this example. You have the ability to edit any of the data in this spreadsheet, but the only sections that you really need to adjust are the yellow boxes as is stated in the instructions. So these are yellow boxes, yellow box, yellow box. So just adjust the information in the yellow boxes in the spreadsheet. As of July 2024, we now receive geospatial FSA CLU data. The acreage data in this spreadsheet now in the FSA crop spreadsheet for your county is specifically the acres grown in your county's portion of NSW watersheds. As a result, do not adjust acreage values in the spreadsheet except to add double cropped or manured soybean acres if you have any to report. So in this example, you can see here that I just have the one column in the spreadsheet with acreage information, and there is no yellow boxes except when I scroll down to soybeans double cropped. Sorry, my mouse is doing something weird. Soybeans double cropped and soybeans manured. Those do have yellow boxes in this section. So we do ask that you fill in acreage information if you do have any to report for those particular subcategories of soybeans. I have filtered the crops for your county so that the only crops that are displaying in this spreadsheet and in the table are those crops that can be run through NLO. However, if you need to access crop data for other crops, you can filter the crops and add additional crops to that filter. So again, if you click the filter, you can see that I have not included things like cabbage or eggplant acres reported in the county because we do not have categories to report that acreage in NLU. So that is why they're not displaying here. But if you ever want to look back at your other crop data for your county, you have the ability to click that and add crop to this table. All right. Annually, we are looking to capture total nitrogen loss estimation worksheet NLU reportable crop acres that were planted and received fertilizer, which includes crops that were planted and succeeded, as well as crops that were planted and failed. We are looking to capture both inorganic and organic fertilizer applications and the total amount of nitrogen applied per acre for that crop per year. If there were multiple fertilization events that occurred during the growing season for a particular crop, please determine what the total application nitrogen rate should have been for the year. In the annual reports that we prepare, we also capture information on cropland that was idle or fallow in reporting years. Often this acreage falls into grass categories that have the intended use left standing. If any grass acreage was fallow, please write that word in the fertilization rate column. I encourage you to reach out to your local FSA staff to discuss the FSA crop data included in your county's FSA crop data report if you are unsure of how they sort crops into various categories or the directions that they give to farmers for that. Again, do not adjust any acreage values in the spreadsheet except to add double cropped or manured soybean acreage if you have any to report. These are the totals of actual crops that were grown in your county's portion of NSW watersheds or basins based on geospatial processing of FSA CLU data. As a result, it is the most accurate crop estimate that we've been able to generate at any point in time. for crop acres grown in your county's portions of NSW watersheds or basins. The NLU tool does have different categories for capturing manured and double crop soybeans. Um, and unfortunately, acres of manured or double crop beans are not reported by FSA. So this is where we rely on the LAC to inform acre estimates and rate estimates for those subcategories of soybeans. So again, there are the soybean double crop, soybean manured sections of your table here. The acreage column information is blank. So if you have acreage information to estimate or report for soybeans in those subcategories, this is where you should report that acreage information. This is particularly relevant with manured beans. If you have any waste lagoon or pond closures from swine and dairy assistance program or other programs, you might have manured beans to report for this crop year or future crop reporting years. So keep that in mind and add information about manured beans specifically into your spreadsheet if you do have manured bean activity happening in your county's portion of NSW watersheds and basins. We need to be able to capture that information for annual reporting. There are two columns in the spreadsheet for fertilization rate information. The first column is fertilization rate information for the last crop year that we completed reporting for, and that was crop year 2023. We are collecting fertilization rates for crop year 2024, and that is fertilization applications that happen between October 1st of 2023 through September 30th of 2024. So that we are currently in crop year 2025, so do not base estimates based on what people are currently putting out, base them off of what folks put out last crop year for those crops. For Piedmont counties that grew corn in crop year 2024, we do also have a residue management column that needs to be completed in order to estimate the percentage of corn grown under no-till management. And throughout the spreadsheet, I do include notes and comments, particularly in this crop year 2023 fertilization rate column, that help to try and explain the data and what is being requested. So with that, we'll go through the motions to fully complete this crop spreadsheet together. And so you can see how the process flows. So at the start of the process, I always like to look at the instructions. Really, the bulk of the instructions is to review the data. And what I've already covered, do not make changes to the acres columns in your spreadsheet except for double cropped and manured soybeans. Fill in fertilization rate information for crop year 2024 for corn. Fill in information about no-till management. And then the last two steps is to instruct you to look at your BMP spreadsheet if you haven't done that already. And then once all of your data is complete, to send an email to the non-point source planning coordinator with the division, which is me, Allie Dinwiddie, and my email and phone is listed at the top if you do have any questions or need to get in contact with me. So that's the instructions. So we will start going through this step by step. So really this is going to get repetitive pretty quickly. Really, it's just important for LAC members to coalesce together and to really talk through fertilization rates. That's the main goal of what we're trying to capture for reporting for the crop report every year. And for the fertilization rate discussion, it's very useful to have regional agronomists, field crop extension specialists, farmers that grow certain crops in the county to be able to participate. It is also helpful for staff to follow up with farmers if they don't have farmers that know of the fertilization rates on specific crops after the meeting or at any time to inform what the rates should be for those crops. So we do need to get accurate information, and the most accurate information that we can get is to actually consult with farmers and what they're actually putting out on the ground. So the opportunity that you can provide that additional level of um, dialogue between staff and farmers to know what was being applied is really helpful to make sure that all of the fertilization rate information that you're sending in is accurate to what's happening on the ground in your county's portion of NSW watersheds or basins. All right, so let's say that our LAC is meeting. We do have corn producers that are participating in the meeting, or it's just widely known by the folks that participating that folks are actually fertilizing a little bit more on corn this year than they did last year. So they're putting out about 185 pounds of nitrogen per acre on corn plant. So let's say that we're going to bump that up to 185. For some county reports, I do see that they might fertilize sweet corn a little bit differently than they would yellow field grain corn. So they might have it a little bit higher or maybe even a little bit lower for sweet corn. So there's not a tremendous amount of acres of sweet white or sweet yellow grown early. So it's okay to lump in the same fertilization rates for all corn since the majority of it is this yellow field corn grown for grain. But if there are differences in fertilization between these different corn types, please try and capture that information. All right. For Piedmont counties, you'll see an additional couple of yellow boxes next to all of the corn rows in your spreadsheet where it asks you for the percent acreage that's grown in no-till management. So let's say for this year, we're going to report a higher percentage of acreage grown under no-till management because we've had some additional contracts or we're aware of additional acreage in the county that folks are utilizing no-till management methods in order to grow this commodity. So let's bump that up to 60% this year based on that discussion. All right, scrolling down here, next crop is cotton. Let's say that that was fertilized actually a little bit less. We talked to a couple of cotton producers and they're actually putting out only about 75 pounds per acre last year. And so we want to knock that fertilization rate down a little bit to reflect that change and lower fertilization. One thing I guess to point out, if you weren't aware of it, is that I do have this irrigation practice column included in the crop report spreadsheet. This does show which crops are irrigated and which crops aren't irrigated. And for cotton, if there is differences between irrigated cotton and non-irrigated cotton with regards to fertilization, this is a chance to reflect that as well. So please look at the different columns in the spreadsheet: intended uses, irrigation practice, crop type, to inform fertilization rates as well. All right, scrolling down here, we're now into these orange rows, and you can see that this is cover crop. And I do have a helpful note here. So this note says no rate needs to be reported. The cover crop is included in the spreadsheet to help the LAC estimate cover crop acreage implemented in crop year 2024. In the BMP spreadsheet, we will be asking LACs or counties to estimate an amount of unfertilized, unharvested cover that was planted in crop year 2024. And I include this FSA estimate just to have that as a reference if the county wants to or staff want to use that as a reference to determine a cover crop acreage estimate in their BMP spreadsheet. But you do not have to specify any fertilization rates for cover crops unless these were fertilized. If these were fertilized, and I can report them under like a cereals. And if it's a mixture, if I get more information about what that mixture is, I should report that. So if you're aware of fertilized cover that's being planted and is being reported under this cover crop category with FSA, we do need to try and capture that. All right, moving down to cucumbers. Last year, let's say last year's rate was 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and let's say that that's still good. So we're gonna keep 120 and move on. All right, the next kind of set of orange rows are fallow and idle. So both of these, uh, I guess, crop types, fallow and idle, we do sum up total fallow and idle land in NSW basins every year and include that in our annual reports. So it is information that I want the LAC to be aware of, and to know about, but it it's unfertilized, and it's not run through Endless. So you don't need to do anything with that information, but just be aware of the fallow and idle land that I will be summing up for your county in the annual reports, to generate a total estimate for total fallow and idle land in the NSW watershed or basin, for which I'm completing an annual report for. All right, now we are down to the grasses section. So we first have coastal Bermuda grasses. Let's say that we talk to farmers and we talk to extension field crop agents and regional agronomists, and fertilization was actually a little bit higher than 250. Let's say that was closer to 280 this year, and we need to update that value. But let's say that we talk to, again, those same folks, farmers, other LAC members, uh, extension specialists, regional agronomists, and the fescue grasses in the county were largely under fertilized. And so that rate for fescue was actually closer to 60. So we're going to make a change there. All right. The next category of grass that I have is native less standing. So I do have a helpful note in this column that says no rate was reported last year for crop year 2023 for this crop category, and the acreage was included in the fallow total. So the instruction is to write fallow if the acreage was not fertilized and remained idle in crop year 2024. So let's say that that was the case and that this was fallow acreage this year. All right, now we're down to orchard grass. Let's say that orchard grass was fertilized similarly to fescue in this past year, and was as a result should be given a 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre rate. You will note for orchard, I again have the helpful note that says no rate was reported last year, so no acreage was grown in crop year 2023, and the instruction is to report a rate this year. So this note is not saying that orchard grass was not fertilized at all last year. This note is basically just saying that the crop did not show up on the crop report, either because it wasn't grown, or a farmer didn't report it to FSA for some reason. And so because of that, the county didn't have to come up with a fertilization rate estimate for that particular crop. We do occasionally have crops that like show up every other year out of the blue. It might be something that somebody's testing a little bit of in the county, but it's not widely grown in the county yet. So please keep that in mind. If you ever get a note in this column, you do have to do some work to rustle up a fertilization rate for that. You can't just rely on the rate from last year like you can with some other crops. You do have to talk to extension specialists, regional agronomists, or farmers to come up with a rate of what that should be. All right, moving on down to mixed forage. Again, mixed forage is in a similar situation if you read the note. No rate was reported, acreage included in the fallow total, right fallow if this acreage was not fertilized and idle in crop year 2024. So mixed forage was in a similar situation as the grass native was last year. And let's say that that remained the same here. I will note that this crop type for mixed forage can sometimes have some additional helpful information. So this has native grass interseeded in there. So that, shows that, okay, this is likely just an extension of native grass, but it might be just some additional mixed that's included. And so it makes sense to be able to report it under fallow category since we're reporting native left standing under that category. All right. Now we're down to oats, winter oats. Let's say that those were a little bit under fertilized, or well, not under fertilized, but just not fertilized as much as last year. So let's say that that went down to 90. And peanuts remained the same at 0. There wasn't fertilizer being applied to peanuts. I will say with peanuts, please check in with farmers and extension staff to see if there is a rate change. In the last couple of years, I have seen that there has been some fertilization jumps for peanuts for whatever reason. Some folks are fertilizing their peanuts at around 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre to increase yields or for some other reason. So it is very useful to follow up with farmers and extension specialists if you are seeing a jump in fertilization of peanuts. We do want to be able to capture that if folks are fertilizing that crop more than they have in the past. All right, scrolling down to sorghum. Let's say that that remained the same as last year on consultation. There wasn't any significant changes. Same thing with soybeans, full season soybeans. For the full season soybeans, folks were putting out a little bit of starter fertilizer, but not many folks were doing that. So on average, there is about 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre in the portion of the county lying in the NSW watershed to soybean acres in the county. All right, now we're down to the soybean subcategories that we do not have FSA acreage information for. So for these, this is where local advisory committee staff knowledge of the county and any good estimates that can be used to estimate acres of double crop beans or manured beans. This is where your knowledge comes in and where we, if you do have information or good estimates to be able to report stuff in these categories to be able to do so. A lot of counties estimate the amount of acreage in double crop soybeans as the amount of wheat acres that was grown in that county. It's portion of the NSW watershed that particular crop year. So let's say that that was the case this year. So we're going to report 5,892.33 acres, which was the same amount as wheat grown in the county's portion of the NSW watershed this year. And so take a notice of what happens to the soybean number up top here when we fill in acreage information. See, it went down. And the reason for that is if you click into the cell, it does subtract the acreage values from double cropped and manured beans that you report this year from the total that was estimated. And that's because I'm assuming that the FSA total soybean value here actually does include double crops and manured bean acres, but it's just not separated out by subcategory. So all of these beans in this column, in this row, excuse me, in this row will be reported under full season in the aggregate and lieu tool. And then any acreage information included in these manured bean cells or double crop bean cells, this will be reported under those specific subcategories. All right, so let's say we go over to the fertilization rate column after we put in an acreage value here. We look at the note, double crop beans are if double crop beans are fertilized differently than full season, please specify a rate and estimate an acreage. Last year's rate was 0. So let's say that that's the same this year. Folks are not putting out any additional fertilizer on double crop beans like they were on average for full season beans. And we'll move on to the manured. So again, for this, this note has been made available and should help with in instructing you on what you need to do to fill out these bean subcategories. So this note says last year a rate of 30 pounds of N per acre were reported for soybeans, but manured acreage could not be estimated. This year, estimate an acreage amount and report a rate for manured beans. So there are counties that know that there's manured beans happening in their county, but they can't begin to come up with some sort of acreage estimate for how many acres are receiving manure. Your county might be in that situation, in which case, maybe write a note or a comment in here and say, we have manured beans, but we cannot approximate acreage in our county. Just something to let me know your county situation. Um, you're also welcome to report a rate, but then put in 0 acres here. But it's much more helpful for me to interpret your spreadsheet if you include a note for explaining yourself for how you filled this category in. As I mentioned, we do have some lagoon closure programs happening, uh, and that might have information for you to report a fertilization rate and an acreage rate for beans that you know of in your county did receive manure. So let's say that we were aware that 500 acres in the counties in the portion of the county grown in the Neuse basin did receive manure at about 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. This could be higher, but let's say that on average it was about 30. Okay, I think we've talked enough about soybeans. Moving down to tobacco, last year's rate was 85 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Let's say that remained pretty good, so we're going to keep that the same. And then for wheat, last year's rate was at 85. Let's say that wheat was actually fertilized more. This year it was fertilized closer to 110. So we're going to bump that up based on, talking with extension and regional agronomists and farmers to 110. And with that, we're going to double check that all of our yellow boxes have been filled in. Looks like they have, with a number or a word or something. So with that, it looks like we have completed at least the FSA crop spreadsheet for our county this year. In which case, if we haven't gone to the BMP spreadsheet to fill that out, we should do that at this time. And if you have filled out the BMP spreadsheet already, and you've now completed the crop spreadsheet, you should send me, Allie Dimity, an email that all of your county spreadsheets have been updated with your local data. So if you do have any questions about the FSA crop report for crop year 2024 reporting, please contact the Division of Soil and Water Non-Point Source Planning Coordinator. That's me, Allie Dimity. My email and phone number is listed there. I'm always happy to answer questions or to provide additional information. And thank you so much.